Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, can at times contain adult language and themes. It is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Digital Dissection podcast, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties, creators, and topics. We are your humble hosts, Joe and Mark, two pop culture nerds dedicated to telling entertainment history before it's forgotten too soon. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and our blog for more information on the show. We also love to hear from you, so why not write us at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. And now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to dissecting.
Joe, I can't believe that it is officially October.
Yeah, it comes up faster every year, but I will never, ever be sad that it's spooky season and it's here faster than we anticipated. Because this will always be my favorite time of year. The good old fall chill, all the horror movies on TV that are edited so they can be on TV, and then the fact that I just have a plethora of my own library that I'll play throughout the year, but it just feels extra special this time of year.
Oh yeah, it's definitely sweatshirt and chill weather. You know,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I am a big fan of having all of the shape masking clothing on. It's all about comfort in the fall.
Oh, completely. I mean, I was definitely mowing my lawn today in flannel and a vest. So it's officially fall in Wisconsin when you're doing outdoor work in flannels and vests.
I was going to say, it's officially Han Solo season when the high boots and the vests come out. So you are definitely closer to it than I am. But hello, everybody. Welcome back to Digital Dissection. And I can't believe it is the second year of us doing spooky content as we get ever closer to All Hallows Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what, Joe? I don't think we have to reserve, the spooky content for just this month, but this month is definitely going to be a fun one. And we're kicking it off with a very recent property, one of the most recent ones we've covered on this program.
Yeah. So last season, I think if you remember, where we basically did spooky season and did it by monster, where I think we did zombies and vampires and werewolves. We aren't going quite as themey this year. We are keeping it to spooky stuff, but we are sticking with zombies this time around to kick off the spooky mood. And when you say recent, this is again very recent because this is a 2019 was season 1 of this one, and it is a Netflix original. And a Korean drama called Kingdom.
The official classification for the show, very similar to how It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is classified. It's a very long one. This is classified as a South Korean political period horror thriller streaming television series.
Yep, that is definitely its own tiny, tiny corner of the market, but they pack a lot into that corner because this is a fantastic show. And maybe it was just since 2016, South Korea is just a gem of zombie properties, because after Train to Busan and we get Kingdom, and which is 2 seasons and 2 movies, all of which are brilliant. Like, this is some of the, if you just love zombie movies, this is some of the best stuff you're going to see.
Yeah. Korea especially also had We Are All Dead, which is also a Netflix original series, and where it kind of spins the whole zombie outbreak into like a high school and dealing with the fallout. Oh, it's a wonderful series, man. So the Korean market has absolutely given us some amazing properties in the last few years. But as you mentioned, 2019 feels recent, but I feel like I have aged a lot in the last 3 years, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically, we have the pre-plague world and the post-plague world, and this, kind of odd that a show about a plague is in the pre-plague time. So yeah, it seems like a lot has happened, because a lot definitely has since the first episode of Kingdom aired.
It is. And that's what's really interesting about this series, that it did kind of come out right towards the beginning of the COVID pandemic, whatever you want to call it. And when my daughter was born, she was born right at the beginning of COVID. So I started off my earliest COVID days by being at home with my daughter and watching Kingdom. It just didn't.
Way to set the theme. Way to set the mood.
It was the weirdest thing. Like she was just little blob cells, bouncing
Mhm.
around and like flopping and requiring feeding and all that stuff. And in between, it was like, yep, I'm going to go back to watching my period era zombie movie show thing. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I will say this though, for those of you who haven't watched Kingdom yet, for one, that is a mistake. Correct it immediately. But
Mhm.
two, we are going to discuss some very spoilerific and important things about this series. So if you do not want to have it spoiled, please listen to it after you've watched the series.
Yep. Just press pause now. Go watch the entire series. Come back immediately when done, and finish this podcast. Do nothing in between all of that. You literally have to watch about 12 hours worth of zombies, and then come back and listen to us, or watch us, however you choose to hang out.
I was going to say, this is your opportunity. So we're going to kick it right off, though. Now, here's the cool thing about this show. Whenever we talk about properties, it's amazing how shows like Squid Game, for example, this was a property that got denied by multiple studios, right? And it sat on the shelf for something like 15 years, right?
Yeah,
Well,
I think that was the story behind it.
yeah. Kingdom is a little bit different in that it started off as a manga slash, webtoon, I think is the official classification of it. And so it's not like it was shelved for a while. It was a very popular, I think weekly or maybe even daily strip. So people knew about it, and it had a fan base kind of built in, right? Like it was definitely popular. And so this idea for Kingdom was actually being developed, I think, for the better part of maybe like 11 years, actually, like 10, 11 years before it even hits Netflix. So Kim Yoon-hee, who is the creator of Kingdom, she was working on this idea, I'm pretty sure, for the better part of like 10 years. So that to me is like going, that much prep and that much time put into something, I feel very, very confident about the abilities. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like, like how when we had done our episode on Akira and you looked at how much time was put into the manga and set, like, actually developing the story before they even started making the anime. And it's kind of the same idea here, is that you had Kingdom of God, which I believe was the name of the webcomic while it was going on, was the development for quite a while before we got the series. And I think from what I remember of Kingdom of God, like it actually kind of leaves things at a cliffhanger, where the series actually kind of is more of a set ending for the storyline.
Yeah, the Kingdom of the Gods series was a little bit different too, because while it still involves the same historical period for Korea, right? It's the same setting basically. The journey of its main characters is quite a bit different. And so we can start there. I mean, in the comic, you still have like the crown prince of this, Korean province slash country, whatever. And he's journeying across the entire country with a mysterious traveler, right? Like he's technically a diseased traveler, and no one quite knows what the disease is. It's very mysterious. So the comic kind of goes through that. Like that's a lot of the time in between is getting from A to B. But the series itself, well, it still focuses on this crown prince of this nation, right?
Yeah.
It's done quite a bit differently, much more like Game of Thrones, right? From an intrigue standpoint, right?
Yeah, because instead of the mystery of the traveler with the crown prince, and by the way, the crown prince, not to be confused with friend of the podcast, Matt Yankee, who will always be the crown prince to us here. But in this, like you said, it's much more political intrigue, that Game of Thrones like feel, because we start off the series with kind of a very, not cryptic, but like terrifying shot of the emperor of the time. And he is kind of rumored to possibly either be dead or just really, really sick. So he's kind of like a much more serious version of the old guy at the start of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's like, oh, he's dead, but he might get better. No, he's not going to get better. He's
Yeah.
quite bad.
Oh yeah. I'm
hmm
getting better.
Better?
Yeah.
No, you're not. So we have our emperor who's definitely not getting better,
No.
and we are then quickly introduced to the crown prince, who we find out is his son illegitimately. So I think he was his son through. No, maybe you know what? It might not be illegitimately because I don't know the structures of 16th century Korean
Hey.
relationships.
Yeah.
So it was through a concubine, but
Yes.
that may have been an accepted concubine at the time.
Well, so fortunately for you, Joe, I just happen to know this detail. Okay, and my family, for those that do listen to this program, know that my father has a military background of 30 years, and so we just happen to straddle history quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to say that that Eastern politics and history is like my strong point, but what you're saying is true. Okay, now the emperor / king of this nation would have been able to have multiple wives, right? Now, you mentioned a concubine, which would represent the non-royal side of the marriage, right?
There we go.
So
Yep.
these are the women that he technically, has relations with. And hey, I'm not judging, whatever. So this is one of the wives that got pregnant who wasn't the queen. This would have been one of the people that gave him a shoulder to cry on, and it became much more. So,
which of course upsets the actual queen, because it turns out, well, at the start of the series, she is pregnant and is hoping to get the crown prince out of the way so that her child can be the true emperor of Korea at the time. So we have this established of this power struggle between the queen and the crown prince. And then meanwhile, elsewhere, things are brewing in Korea.
They are. And before we get into that, though, there's a couple details I want to put out there for folks that are not quite sure how to make of things yet. So, as you've mentioned, there is this conflict between the royal house, so the emperor and the crown prince, and then the queen, who represents the Haewon Cho clan, which is one of the most, think the Lannisters of South Korea. Okay, that's who the Haewon Cho clan represents. They're very powerful, very influential, very rich, and so they have a vested interest in trying to secure the throne and taking it away from the crown prince. Right. So that's part of the setup here. But what I would like to do for a quick second, Joe, how much about Korean and Japanese history are you aware of from the late 1500s?
The best way I can actually sum this up is actually from, like, I think a TikTok that I saw, where it's how you can tell when you have a Chinese woman and a Korean woman in a club, and then you'll know that they're Chinese and Korean because they'll see a Japanese woman walk in and instantly hate the Japanese woman, because that's the country's history with each other, is that the basically continental portion of Asia really doesn't like Japan, because Japan had basically this like 200-year period where it fought itself as the feudal era, and then they decided, well, we have now come as a whole, we shall go out and fight the others. So that's a very overly simplified version of what happened. So you have basically Korea and China more or less always trying to keep Japan out of the continent and from getting any foothold, military-wise or trade-wise.
Which is honestly not that far off from what's going on at this point in human history, especially on this side of the world. You're actually correct on a lot of that. So at this point in time, this series takes place during what we'll call the shadows of the Imjin War, which specifically refers to the conflict between the Japanese and Korean forces at this point in time. So the actual war itself took place from like 1592 until 1598. So right near the end of that century. And it wasn't a war the entire time. So there was some initial fighting that occurred during the early portion of that period. There was like a truce right in the middle. And of course, they were like, surprise, motherfucker, we're coming back.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
the engagement continued all the way until the end of 1598. And what's interesting about this war, there are some parallels to like the American Revolutionary War, and that the Koreans were very successful because they attacked the Japanese supply lines and their ability to bring resources into the country. So that's why this war was
Ah.
essentially, ended. It was guerrilla warfare. So
Mhm.
it was like, man, like 150 years later, like did we find a book, like a game, like
Mhm.
in-game footage?
Yeah, it turns out that the Union's Anaconda plan was completely stolen from really old South Korean warfare.
If you read on it, if you check it out, I don't know if there's any history buffs that listen to us. I think there may be a few. If you do, it's actually a really interesting
Mhm.
thing. Like they cut off supply chain and it forced the Japanese to withdraw. So interesting bit of period of history to focus on, because it really does set up this series from a tone
Mhm.
standpoint. Now, Joe, as far as the tone of Kingdom goes, like what are your first impressions after you've watched maybe like the first 20, 30 minutes of the show?
Well, are we talking like tone is in like cinematography, or just like a feeling from the characters and the atmosphere that they're in?
Let's just start off with atmosphere, not even
Okay.
characters, like just pure atmosphere.
Uh, I would say adult historical angst. There's just a lot of like it feels like just baggage being carried by every single character in this show as a result of what they were doing before we see anything happening on camera. So obviously, like we said, with the queen and her family and the crown prince and him being born of half not noble blood, and then even when getting into the other characters, you basically see all of them as we start to introduce them one by one be here. All of them have something eating away at them slightly that they're slowly trying to like find ways to like reclaim their lives from. So it's a lot of like them dealing with some sort of fallout.
Yeah, that idea that I mentioned earlier, that shadow of war,
Mm-hmm.
that really carries into quite a few things here. Now, we talked a little bit about the first impressions of just like cinematography. It's like there's this constant haze
Mm-hmm.
that carries across this show. And it's a combination of, I would say, weariness, but then also, like you mentioned, it kind of like angst. There's a lot of this uneasiness. There's a lot of unrest.
Yeah.
It's these people have suffered through war. They suffered through famine, and there's a lot of secrets that it seems like you mentioned everybody has. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's whether it's the government, we talked about the Hayway Cho clan. Whether it's just the people that run the provinces, we kind of get a feel of the governments of each of these smaller provinces.
Mm-hmm.
It's like everybody is concealing something from somebody else.
Yeah. And then you package it up in like this PG-13 escalating, as they like to call it, where it's just lots of lots of shadows, lots of hard lighting, mixed in with an attempt of like natural lighting from the area, so making it look like it's just the light that you're getting from the sun or candlelight or
Yeah.
torchlight. So it's got this on top of, just like you said, living in the fog of war. It's just kind of got this darker tone, like to the entire thing. Even like during the day, like when the sun is out, it still somehow seems foggy and like dim.
If forlorn was like taken into a concept and then physically manifested, everything about this show is forlorn, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
people inside the buildings, they're always, even if they're not in front of royalty, it's always like they're looking
Hmm.
down from each other, like I,
Yeah.
I I feel like I can't be personal with anyone. I mean,
Hmm.
the relationships between the characters in this show, it even feels arm's length, right? And for a few
Mm-hmm.
exceptions, but for the most part, we've got the Crown Prince Li Chang that we've mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can tell just how much pain this guy is in because he is estranged from his father, who, as we've mentioned, the Heiwan Cho clan has basically cut off the emperor from the entire nation. Nobody knows what's going on with him,
Mm-hmm.
including his own son.
Mm-hmm.
And you just see it. I mean, now this is something that I think that Zhu Ji-hun did an amazing job with. So he's obviously Li Chang. The look on his face, even in the promotional materials for this show, he constantly looks like reluctant, doesn't he?
Yeah, I was thinking either reluctant or in pain to some degree. Like not like not like agonizing, like he has like something sharp stabbing through him, but like
Conflicted.
he's conflicted. He's going through something mentally, and that's what promotional like footage looks like, and basically every episode of this guy until you get closer to the end here, because if it's not like him feeling estranged from his family, eventually it gets to the point where he's trying to show that he's more than all of the other government officials who we've seen on screen so far.
Yeah, he really starts off his journey as you can tell he's not close to the rest of like the royal inner circle, right? The
Mm-hmm.
advisors and all these people, and naturally this is because of Cho Hak Ju, who is the father of the queen, and
Mm-hmm.
he's one of the head members of the Hei Wancho clan, right? Like he's one of the key players that managed to get his way, into one of the top roles in the entire nation. And so that's kind of what you're up against. Like Li Chang is obviously the good guy. Like
Yeah.
he's your boy, right? He's the guy that you're
Mm-hmm.
focusing on. But the quote unquote bad players in this scenario here, they are very clear to establish them, I think, before
Mm-hmm.
even Li Chang. Like he obviously you get to know a lot more about him as the series goes on, but they are very clear to focus on the political intrigue long before we see our first zombie,
Very
right?
true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really cool decision to do that. I mean, what did you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think what's great about the show is part of it, like again, like the zombies are many times like secondary, and while they are kind of like this outright terror, they're not the biggest threat to the entire story. And I just like it when the monsters are actually more people or more of the people instead of the actual monsters themselves. I think it's great storytelling. So when you like again, like the zombies are just scary at surface level because like they're running around, they're screaming, they're biting, they're spreading a plague, and that's one thing. But then when you see like the queen's father, like by the time like he is definitely like intimidating, but then when you hit like episode 5 of the first season, like he is just flat out scary. Like
Oh yeah.
fuck, holy shit, the power that this guy has, like on top of him just being, a very assertive individual. So there's of course like the physical power and then the political power that he has is terrifying. And
Yeah.
I like it when we can, I don't want to say I'm ever like some sort of like weird like monster groupie where I always feel bad for the monster in every movie because I think that's, unless the monster is written to be like that way, like Frankenstein's monster, like it's supposed to be a victim of its society to a point. But I do like it when you can turn things on a head like that, where it's like, oh, the monsters are bad, but compared to this asshole, the monsters aren't nearly as scary. And I like it when things can do that and do that well.
Yeah, but the thing is with the zombies, Zeds, whatever you want to call them, monsters. I think monsters are a really good term for this one because
Yep,
man,
and I think that's what they
whew,
call them in this show. They
they
call
do,
them monsters. Yeah.
they
Hmm.
do. The thing that I thought was really cool about the monsters though is that they root it in this historical fiction.
Hmm.
So we talked a little bit here about the Imjin War, right? They actually had an explanation within this show as to how the Koreans won.
Yeah.
and it had nothing to do with what we just mentioned.
No.
So the kingdom at this point, I believe, is referred to as Joseon. That's what this current like state is called, is Joseon, or the current version of Korea as most people know it, right? Like that's modern Korea. So they actually explained how the Koreans won the conflict, and it was with the help of a rather peculiar, I can't even pronounce it, peculiar purple flower, little purple flower. Now, Joe, what can you tell us about the resurrection plant? What do you remember about that?
I mean, it is somewhere between Little Shop of Horrors and Zombie Toilet of the Damned. not quite that bad. So I'm in the middle of I'm in the middle of rewatching season 1 right now. By in the middle, I'm almost done with it. So I'm trying to get a little less foggy with season 2. Where they really explain the flower a lot more.
You can't just drop a reference to zombie ass Toilet of the Dead and not explain it, because if folks, if you've never seen zombie ass Toilet of the Dead, for one, it's not a great movie, but it does involve tapeworms, which oddly enough has something to do with the resurrection plant, Joe.
Yep.
And so the resurrection plant, what they actually found out was that in the northern regions of Joseon, or the modern Korea as we know it, this flower mysteriously began growing within the region, and they don't quite know, or at least we don't quite know. I think they're going to explain this in season 3 and some of the ongoing properties they're making. But this flower begins to appear, and what they've learned about it is that it can resurrect people from the dead. Obviously not as we know them, but it has the ability to bring people back to life. So naturally, people knew about this because they used dead villagers during the Imjin conflict, and they gave them the resurrection flowers, which then used to fight back the Japanese forces. So it was like, for me, I was watching this, knowing a little bit about this conflict and going, that's fucking crazy awesome. Because it fits so damn well. Like if you're thinking about how they've mentioned some of these provinces within Korea at the time, and how the odds were so famously stacked against them.
Yeah,
it's like that fits like a glove to explain this.
Yeah, it's like one of those like stories, like the 300 Spartans like sort of deal, where like there's no way they should have been put up the fight that they did, and they managed to do it. And it's kind of fun to just be able to take that history where it has like seemingly impossible odds, and therefore you give it you give it an impossible explanation as to how it was pulled off.
Seriously, it's cool because, once again, this is one of those secrets that it feels like the show expertly built into it. Now, the Imjin conflict and using the monsters to fight back the Japanese is something that even the people of that province seem to be really torn over having to do. And now, I'm not sure if you remember specifically An Yun, the mentor to the Crown Prince that you end up meeting fairly early in the series. He's trying to travel and navigate the plague as it's kind of stretching across the country. We end up meeting An Yun, who is he's an older magistrate of one of the provinces, right?
Yeah, and he's like dressed in like all white, isn't he?
Yeah, oh yeah. He's got badass facial hair. Like he's the dude. If there's like a big fight breaking out, he's not moving. He's just standing there with his arms behind his back, and you're like, what is that? What is he doing? He's going to do something awesome, isn't he?
Why is he so calm in the middle of all this?
It's like, okay, keep your eye on that guy. He's going somewhere, And everybody looks at him that way too. Like they're all like going, like, oh my god, is that chick? That's Li Ching's mentor. That's motherfucking An Yun right there. And everybody knows him. Well, it's because of the fact that he helped lead that engagement. And so him and his leadership bear the secret of what had to happen in order to win. But to everybody else, they're just like, that guy's legendary. He's a war hero. And you don't know this going in, right? Like you don't know this right away. So it was really cool to see how that unfolds, because as we've kind of talked about a couple times here now, you have compounded secrets, right? Like Li Chang learned a lot from An Yun, more than even his dad, as he was raised, in military tactics and all that stuff. So even Li Chang doesn't know this. And so it's really cool, man, because at this point in time in the show, I know we kind of move fairly fast here, but
yeah,
that's the whole point of watching the show, is to not listen to us talk about it, to go watch it yourself.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, the plague is breaking out across the entire country. And so people are looking for answers naturally. They're trying to figure it out. Like, how do we fight this back? How do we do this? And so why I wanted to focus on this relationship between An Yun and Li Chang is because this causes some mistrust between student and mentor, even. Because Li Chang is like going, why did An Yun not tell me about some of these things? And is he actually working for, the Heiwan Cho clan? Right? Like,
yeah.
Like, and it's a wonderful twist, by the way. Like, it kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm even trying to equate that relationship to something where you find out that, like, I don't want to say like the don't meet your hero thing, but it's almost as though, like, I guess, like, you think Batman Begins, where, like, Bruce Wayne learns that Ra's al Ghul's not a great person after he taught him so much. But I mean, that also happens, like, relatively quickly that he finds that out. Whereas you get this where you had someone who the Crown Prince, like, beloved and looked up to his entire life, and then suddenly he realizes he's not who he thinks he is anymore. So it just, again, you go from having this great admiration from when the characters first see each other in the series, to then just immediate, like, I don't know what to do with this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's that beautiful, like, compounded impact here, right? Because these people think they can trust each other because of the amount of time they spend together, obviously before this conflict began. But it's like the worst possible time for this stuff to come out is when you're facing hordes of the undead, right? You're trying to save like city after city of people, right? Like the Crown Prince kind of puts his cape on here, and he's like, "Yep, get on my back. I'll carry you," because he's trying to save his people. Like he's losing that inner conflict where it's like, I haven't been fighting for anybody for the last 20 years, and suddenly I have to. So he figures out a lot about himself throughout this, but that makes this that much harder because it's like, what do I even believe now? And I've got the undead coming after me. I mean, I don't know how I would compartmentalize that.
No, it's a tough, like, amount of things to handle, and it's also, like, part of what makes even that whole idea interesting of him actually having something to fight for, because he's now out trying to protect the people who, like, you would expect, like, if you are someone living this time period, you are hoping that, like, your government officials, the people who you're paying your taxes to, are actually going to protect you against these things. And
Very
so
true.
far, you've seen that basically fail with every government leader in the series so far, because, like, we see the outbreak slowly kind of go through a few areas in season 1, and we are seeing the government officials basically completely living in luxury, where you've got the people living under them are all in poverty. And then when things start to go wrong, they're, like, shoving the peasants in front of the zombies and hoping they get eaten instead of, like, themselves. The peasants get eaten instead of themselves, or they're just kind of running and fleeing. And one of them even becomes kind of like a member of our show party, and I think that's Chobham Paul, who is the nephew of the uncle who has fathered the queen. So this character, I think, I always like watching characters who actually grow quite a bit through a series.
Yeah.
And so we see this guy who, when we first meet him, it's at his, like, little inauguration party of him being appointed governor of this province that we're now in part of the series. And you can tell, like, he is completely uneasy, and he's like, I'm not qualified for this job, and I'm not sure why I'm getting it. And
nepotism. Full on nepotism.
Completely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not about what you can do, it's about who you know. And
Yes.
and Chopin is a combination of things. Like he's obviously in the shadow of his uncle,
Mm-hmm.
the chief state counselor. He also does have a sense of just ignorance about him that you kind of mentioned, the haplessness. He's almost comedic. It's almost comedy relief after
Yeah.
a point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because here's one thing. His storyline interacts really closely with Sabi, the nurse that we get
Mm-hmm.
introduced to, right? She's taking care of this fairly small town of survivors that they don't have enough food to eat. She's just mending to the sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was the understudy of the physician for the emperor. So her story comes into play because she's trying to track down, what did my mentor do with the emperor that caused all these rumors to start spilling out?
Yeah.
She's trying to uncover
Mm-hmm.
that. So yeah, her in Chop Mon Pao, they interact quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I wanted to point at the comedy relief is because she sends him out to go grab herbs for the sick. Do you remember this scene when he brings
I
back
do.
this bag of herbs?
It's all weeds.
she goes, "This is very impressive," and he like looks at her and he's all proud of himself. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
she goes, "It's impressive that
Impressive.
everything you brought back was weeds."
Oh,
Yeah,
because that's even. I feel like that. Like they have a few of those moments. Because the first time he's like just trying to talk to her, and he's kind of romantically smitten at this time. Like he doesn't know what to quite do, and she's pointing out. Basically, she's like, "Oh, what's wrong? Why can't you talk? I've noticed you have this going on. This too. I think you have gonorrhea based off of how you're acting right now, but don't worry, it's treatable if it's early." And he's just like, no, oh no. She thinks I have a she thinks I have some sort of sexually transmitted disease. Yes. And he's just nervous. And that's all it is.
And it is a rare thing to see in this show to have moments like that, because they don't overuse them. That's what kind of takes you out of some of these horror survival movies and shows.
Yeah.
They never quite nail the balance between what should be believable humor versus just inserting something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think they do this quite well, especially with Sabi's story, because she's the one trying to figure out what is happening to cause this. And she's one of the rare people that gets to see it up close. Because if you remember, there's that kind of weird, he calls himself a tiger hunter, Young Shin, if you remember.
I do.
He's like a sword rifle master and has a sick ponytail, as a lot of these guys do. But that's why she sees this thing up close, because Young Shin feeds a dead kid to this village that she's taking care of. And it was just sorry, I'm
cold.
getting
like it's difficult because like I think the line from the webcomic is that something along the lines of there weren't even bugs left to eat. Like things had gotten that bad around the area where they had nothing. So they literally started cooking dead people to try and get by.
And you can tell that other people had done this across the nation, right? And that's once again calling back to just how truly split this nation is, because you get to see what life is like for the rich, the privileged, all those folks, right? One thing this show does particularly well in kind of separating the imagery of that is whenever you see the folks that truly didn't have resources, whenever you watch them eat, they make sure to really zoom in, and it's never elegant table manners.
No, it's not. This is definitely like I remember growing up, like being a relatively slow eater until one day, or for a series of days, when my brother had one of his friends over, and this boy I don't think ever ate at home, and it's not to say like he came from necessarily like an impoverished family, I just don't think he ever chose to eat at home because
Yeah.
he just always ate our food really fast to the point where my dad had to actually put food aside for work the next morning because he always had leftovers. And normally you could do that at the end of the meal, but he had to start doing it before. And it got to the point where whenever Pete was over, like you had to eat fast or you didn't eat at all. And so all of the lower class citizens in the show seem like they have Pete over at all times.
It's
You just had to get through the food and you had to get through it fast.
it's the plight that they really build here because,
Mm-hmm.
as we've mentioned, this is trying to balance how split this nation really is at this point in time. You know, these people don't even have rice to
Mm-hmm.
eat. You know,
No.
and so when they suddenly see this pot full of, hot meat, like just staring them in the face,
Mm-hmm.
they eat it like they haven't eaten in weeks, which is probably true. And
Yeah.
so it's terrifying because they're already eating in a way that is kind of like the tomato eating scene in the Lord of the
Mm-hmm.
Rings that everybody if anybody's a Lord of the Rings fan knows what I'm talking
Yep.
about
You
here.
know. Yep. You know exactly what it is.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like when
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing those tomatoes just kind of burst, it's disgusting, whatever. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's what this feels like. And so what makes
Mm-hmm.
it crazy is when they eat this dead kid, they eat so fast, they like instantly turn into zombies, all of them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's even like something that I want to get into the actual zombies here for Rick. So we've done a lot about the historic part, the political part, and I feel like I think it may be time to actually talk about the fact that this is indeed a zombie-based show.
Yeah.
So getting into the monsters a little bit, it is always fun to like see like how different properties will handle like zombies, and you either get like these slow-moving, mindless things, or you get these rabid runners. And there's always this idea of where there's usually someone in the group who got bit and they're the asshole who didn't tell anyone they got bit and they turn at a very inconvenient / convenient time for whatever the plot needs for the movie or the show.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at how they actually handle zombies in this, it is one, I think, just great that the fact that they've chosen like an older time period to have their zombies in, because then we miss a lot, or we don't get a lot of the same zombie tropes that we get from when like society inevitably crumbles because the plague spreads so fast and like you can't deal with it and people are turning on each other and like the people are the worst part of it. And that's not necessarily the case here because society is very different at this time. It's very spread out. We don't have the instant communication. So it takes a while for like the word of this thing to spread. And when that does happen, we don't get like the instant, like the government just collapses and things are turned over because like we said before, the government here is very controlling and it gets to the point where like they're actually the thing to be afraid of more than the zombies. And the zombies in this are interesting because they played off, or the way they set them up is that you had the people who got sick turned really quick in that the first time we see zombies, and then the next batch of them that were going to be turning like weren't going to turn until like the sun went down, and that's part of, I know that's also part of like foreshadowing of showing that like they're not really active during the daylight, and it's during at night they tend to be up and going a lot more. But when they turn at night, like they are like instant boom zombies, and these things are definitely the faster running zombies.
Oh God, yes.
You don't get the slow moving staggering things that eventually just catch up to you.
Yeah, we don't get no shamblers. There's no shamblers in this show. No, they're all track runners, these guys. And the thing
Yep.
is, I love whoever directed the zombie runners because you don't end up getting any of these like stylized zombies that you get in The Walking Dead who are, hustling, shaking almost. It's almost like a dance. Well,
Yeah.
these zombies they're so primordial and they're so rough that they're literally just brainstem pushing things around.
Yep.
And so when they run at you, you'll see this in all of the imagery. Their arms are like flailing behind them because the front of their body is pushing them forward and their limbs are just flying behind them Naruto style. You know,
Yeah.
it's really terrifying to watch the
Mhm.
first time because their mouths are
Mhm.
open and they're just running as fast
Mhm.
as they physically can. It is hard to watch at first.
It is, and it's. I mean, it's. I think it's just brilliant to show again that like the zombies are just completely consumed by the hunger to like eat and consume everything. So like you have this idea that they're literally being led by their mouths as fast as they can go towards anything they can eat.
Yeah, and it really ramps up the imagery that we talked about. When you watch people who
Hmm.
are like they haven't eaten in weeks and suddenly they have food, the parallel is made that they're very similar to how the undead are eating people. It's
Hmm.
it's gut wrenching, and so that's something I didn't want to get too far away from. But at the same time, I did want to revisit what you mentioned with this zombie lore.
Hmm.
It is really unique because you're dead on with the fact that information travels, a lot slower,
Hmm.
and that's not really enough though. It's the fact that every time someone does bring it up in a new place, the government doesn't believe anybody,
Yep.
right? Like the leaders
Hmm.
don't believe anything. It's like, oh, you're just making that up, or no,
Hmm.
it can't be that bad, right?
Nah, it's just smallpox. We'll get through it. It'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah, and
Hmm.
and that's kind of how it goes. It's almost this idea that we always talk about how we've loved zombie properties that help you
Hmm.
see what society is like and then show it break down. This is that idea, but just set in
Hmm.
late 1500s, early 1600s Korea, and
Yeah.
and that balance I thought was really really cool. I think it was really smart too because
Hmm.
it's believable for a zombie property. Like this is
Hmm.
very believable given what we know and what these folks know.
Yeah, and you see, like again, like when you say like society crumbles, it is this idea that those who have power, and if they start to see it going away, like they cling to it for dear life. Because even early on, when you've got the crown prince and his bodyguard are trying to get, I believe, like a small chunk of people into, I think, like what they think is like an abandoned like military barracks. It
Yeah.
turns out it's not abandoned at all. Like the military there is just hiding and staying quiet and hoping that no one bothers to come into the barracks so they can have the place all to themselves. And then they think they violently resist the crown prince and the people as they try and get in too. And that's just again like what we see even like the government officials who try fleeing, and even our boy the didn't really want to be governor, but it was a good job, so he took it. Chow Bum Paul. Um, there are times where we see him do that same thing, where even when it seems like he grows a spine and he's going to stick to what he's doing and he's going to stick with the crown prince, next thing you know, he's setting sail with a bunch of other government officials who have a ship full of food and money.
But it's very true though what you said. I mean the difference between government or whatever you want to call it, high ranking officials and the people, that separation continues throughout this entire series for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of tells you what the frame of mind must have been. You talked about it earlier, how the magistrates and the government, they're pushing the people into zombies and stuff, but they also say this whenever the crown prince, he specifically says to them, get your best fighters, get your
Mm-hmm.
weapons, we need to be prepared for this. And the first thing the government and the nobles, they always say, I don't take hand to sword, I don't do this stuff.
No, no,
He's
no,
not
no.
talking
Mm.
about me, right?
It's like, yeah, you.
Yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
what no, not you, me,
No,
no, no.
no. Mm-hmm.
And so that stuff is I think it's really helps table set, right? It really helps
Mm-hmm.
immerse you in what's truly going on here, and I think it makes sense, because historical dramas, Joe, how many of them have you watched just off the top of your head?
Um, I got through some of Downton Abbey, but more than I'm proud of, but less than I think most have gotten through. So I think that's as far as historical drama I've gotten to.
Well, but even then, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
maybe not even think that truncated. Like if you think about 300, for example, as a film,
Mm-hmm.
technically considered historical drama, right?
True. Mm-hmm.
but there's so much stupid stylized shit that happens in that movie,
Oh
right?
yeah, I mean the whole thing.
I was going to say,
Hmm.
and that's not to say I hate 300 by any means,
No. Hmm.
but it's the idea that you took something historical and you made it ridiculous,
Yep.
as opposed to focusing on the historical struggles of this country at this point in time and making your fictional story fit the history
Hmm.
as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this series does so incredibly well.
I completely agree. And like 300 as I mean, fun movie for its time. I think I still enjoy it. It's a very visceral thing. Like you said, very very stylized. And there is style to this too. Like we mentioned, like the cinematography is like kind of gritty, and there's this fog of war, but it's stylized in that they're taking history and making it into like its own art form, as opposed to applying an art form to history, like we've seen before. And I think that's just one of the many strengths of this series, and the fact that again, like other than like Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, like how many times do we get like this older society dealing with more of a modern monster?
Yes.
Um, And it's a fun take that we get that, because usually like when we get old stuff, it's always like vampires and werewolves.
Yeah.
And while those are they're classic monsters and they're fun and we love watching their movies, it was just great to get something happening in these ancient times, but with a different monster.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really do, because I really do think that when I had to suspend my disbelief, right, for aspects of
Hmm.
this show, obviously zombies are one of those things that most people just kind of go, yeah, okay, zombies don't really exist, whatever. But
Yeah.
it was the setup that got us there that
Hmm.
really helps keep us in this for as long as we do. You know, like
Yeah.
you get so much of this background and this story that makes sense to you,
Hmm.
and then when you kind of just fit zombies in there as the aggressor, it just everything else makes sense.
Yeah.
So so for me, I
Hmm.
thought it was one of those mysteries of this series that I thought worked incredibly well is not just
Hmm.
how zombies behave, but it's how these characters learn so much about them. Because think about modern zombie movies. Half the time it's about survival. It's not about
Hmm.
what the zombies are doing. Sometimes you get the scientific angle, like in the Day of the Dead
Hmm.
series and all that kind of stuff. But even then, it's like laughable science,
Oh
right?
yeah. Hmm. And that's I
So
mean, even on that, like I mean, if you try and ever like go to a movie in hopes that it's going to get the science right, one, it probably isn't, because if it does, it's probably not going to be terribly entertaining. It's probably going to be really boring because you just find out the movie wouldn't work. Like
yeah, yeah,
it's not going to work at all. Like I mean, granted, like Interstellar is a really good job until it turns out a black hole is a library. Um, but before that was doing really well, and that's part of like the art form that they're doing with it. But like what it goes for me when it comes to movies and science is that if a movie establishes a science and it sticks to it,
yeah,
I'm fine with it. It's when, like, if they say like, because this happened, because we observe this, therefore this happens. And as long as it sticks to that for the movie, it's fine, even if the actual science would be terrible. Because I mean, things that should be entertaining would just be ruined. But granted, like even like Ant-Man, like one, because Ant-Man
oh
does try and get the whole science part of it right, where like yeah, he shrunk down to a tiny ant size, but he still has all the same mass. Therefore, he is even more dense. So if he were to punch someone when he's tiny, it still feels like he's big, like you're being punched by like 5'10" Paul Rudd, or how tall Paul Rudd is.
yeah,
Um, Handsome, adorable, possibly shorter than I'm giving him credit for. Um, but then you'll see him like ride an ant. Like no, he should squish the ant as soon as he sits on it. Or when he's running along the gun should go down because it's the weight of an entire human being, and then some because it's more dense. Oh, no, then some, but it's it's at this point like 175 pounds on one tiny spot just going down.
yeah,
So like it tries to, it's like, oh, it's getting the science right, but really it's not getting the science right. So that's more annoying to me than like something like this, because it does try and explain how the zombies work. And the way it does it works for the movie. It works for the show. They have this idea that it's the flower, but it turns out there's something more than the flower, and they're trying to figure it out as it goes along. And then
Yes.
they reveal what it is. And it's like, you know what? It's actually kind of close to if you've ever like played Last of Us, where it's like a
Yes.
fungus that like turns something into a zombie. It's close to that, but a little different. And I don't want to reveal exactly what it is because
Yeah.
I mean, it has to do with the flower. This is like a fungus turning things into zombies, different things of life. But I digress. They establish what is causing it. There's still a mystery behind it, and they find out what it is. Like, okay, that's not terribly far fetched based off of what you've established in the show. Real life would never happen, but based off of what you're doing in the show, it works. So it's great. It's believable for what you want. It's believable enough for you to suspend what you're supposed to suspend for belief, and that's what one of the many parts that makes the show great.
I totally agree. And it reinforces the point of how not everybody can get the same information at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Because as that news travels about how to combat the zombies and how to deal with them, it really builds some incredible tension that I don't want to rob people of.
Mm-mm.
So compared to things like the MCU and like the 6-episode format that you see in some of the MCU, I think what they could really do here is learn from this series, because each season is 6 episodes. You mentioned the quote unquote movie. It's like a 90-minute episode that came out that is kind of a prequel. But the episodes of this, I think, are really well manufactured, because there's never one episode where they hit you with too many revelations, or you get way too much exposition or something in one episode. It's a really well balanced presentation, and I don't want to call it purely cliffhanger, because I never really feel like it's cliffhanger. I feel like it's like preparing to get punched in the face. Right? Like, does that make sense? Like, some of the end of these episodes are like that, right?
I feel like one of the like being very punched in the face. The way I think it builds well with it's 6 episodes, and this is stuff we've talked about before on the podcast. Like bringing up like what Kristen Kruick has said before. She doesn't necessarily like it when a series draws out to 10 plus seasons, because sometimes if there's no clear like idea for the stories, like starting at any point to like actually align, you're just, you're stretching it, and you can like the audience can tell you're stretching it because the story's not there anymore. So when you have the idea that this season is going to be 6 episodes, so we're going to make sure we get this chunk of the story told well in those 6 episodes, is something that this does very well. And the way it does it is, think of like almost like Home Alone. You get one foot into the house finally, after like having, slipping on ice, having you're touching a doorknob that's burning hot. You finally get into the house, and as soon as you put your feet down, thinking you've gotten one step further in, there are a bunch of broken glass ornaments that you just stepped on, and you have to figure out what you're going to do to find that little kid who's setting these traps for you, so you can take care of the silver tuna. Because that's what the series is. It's like it gives you one little bit of hope, and then it just kind of socks you right in the gut as you find out something new as they build onto the story.
Yeah, which is I'm really happy you mentioned that, because this is a show that doesn't overuse the flashback, right? Like think about every major property you've seen. It feels like Orange is the New Black syndrome. The like Orange is the New Black just kind of drops you into the shit, and then every 5 minutes it's like you're getting a flashback, right?
Yeah.
This show doesn't do that. It really uses the modern timeline quite well. It doesn't have to be lazy in that you get 20 minutes to go forward, and then you get 3 minutes of way too much information told way too fast.
Yep.
And it detaches you from it, right? So I think this show doesn't just do zombie lore really well, it also does character progression incredibly well. And so by the time you do get to these these moments of gut punch at the end or close to the end of an episode or something.
Mm-hmm.
That payoff is truly much more personal than I think it would be, compared to, like I said, those flashback heavy types of shows. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And some shows I like when I think flashbacks, I just makes me think of like Arrow and how like the first 2 seasons were absolute gold. It's some of the best TV, especially like best. I think honestly, best superhero TV that's been made so far has been the first 2 seasons of Arrow, and how they have this idea that Oliver Queen's been gone for 5 years, and so the idea is that what he's doing in his current mission, in the city, is always tied back into what he'd done on this island he was stranded on for 5 years. And it works very well for the first few seasons. And then after that, it's kind of like, well, you did what you set out to do, and now we just have more seasons, and you just keep kind of peppering in more flashbacks kind of oddly, and they just feel out of place. And there's so many other shows that just do that, where it's almost like a kind of like a cop out to explain how a character would know how to do something.
Yeah.
It's not quite as bad as Wonder Woman. Hey, this is something my dad showed me this one time. Now the plane's invisible. That's kind of the worst way to do something. But the flashback is like basically number 2 on that, where it's like, this reminds me of that one time. Flashback. Oh yeah, I can do that. Don't worry about it. It's like, well, I suppose. Why not? There was always that. Everyone's always had that one time that now makes sense why they had to go through it, and we can get through. We're going through our lives right now. But if you use that too much, it's just not interesting anymore.
I think we just ruined flashbacks for a lot of people that
we did
that watch a show, because now I can't ever look back at a show and go, wow, did they actually know what they were planning to do here? No, they didn't. So now we got a flashback to explain everything that's in front of us. And so once again, carefully crafted show. The fact that it's been in development for so long, I think that really just tells you the strength of the idea itself, and how well it's executed, how well it can be put on screen. Because this is probably one of the best properties that involves zombies that I've ever watched. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I plan on rewatching this series. I mean, I think probably like every year around this time, just because one, it's very digestible, like to do that with, where if you just need that quick itch of like, I feel like a horror movie or I feel like a horror series. Again, it's 6 episodes. You can put on an episode like even like every other day, and you'll still have like the entire month of October. You're gonna have the series done. You'll have it taken care of. Or if like it's cold Saturday, cold weekend, you just want to cuddle up and watch some horror. Like you can throw Kingdom on, and you can binge it in a quick sitting. By quick sitting, it's still a 6-hour sitting. You'll have season 1 done. But I mean, it just because like the story is told so well, like you feel like you can just sit for 6 hours and watch the whole thing. So yeah, I would completely agree. And it's like I said, it's digestible. The cinematography is top notch for a Netflix show too. Granted, like Netflix like shows are getting better every year. They're in business, but this is just one of those things where I think it's a staple for Netflix, especially Netflix horror. So yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. I mean, so it's become annual viewing for me as well, ever since I found out about it, ever since I watched it. And because it is an extremely well made show. And one last thing I want to mention about this before we head off for the evening.
Yes.
This show doesn't ever seem to hit a point where The Walking Dead has. Even in the best seasons of The Walking Dead, you will get 1 or 2 episodes, maybe even 3, sometimes in a row, where you're going, where am I heading right now? Right? Like when you have shows that are that long, when you have shows that exist for that long a period of time, there's always that stylized or stylistic interpretation episode where you're like, yeah, somebody thought this was a good idea. It just did not work.
It didn't work. No. Well, no. I even like Walking Dead. Like I haven't watched Walking Dead forever, but yeah, those were, I mean, what, hour long, 45-minute episodes, and they were 22 episodes a season.
No, it was 10. It was 10.
10
First,
episodes. Okay, yeah, even
yeah.
10. Like I would think 10 should be digestible too. Because yeah, like a lot of like other network shows are like 22 episodes. It's like fucking hell, like that's a lot of time to try and tell a good story with. Like it's too much time where you're dragging things out. And so yeah, Walking Dead's even doing that with 10. So
Yeah.
this is again like I guess again really good thing that you're wrapping up a season in 6 episodes. And what we've got season 3 in the works after our movie that we
Yes,
had with
we
Ashen
do.
of the North. All right.
We do.
So there is more time for Kingdom. However, there is not more time for this podcast, this episode. So in closing, we just like to thank you again for listening to Digital Dissection. And as always, we appreciate all the Dissection crew does for us week after week. And your support really does go a long way. So if you happen to reach us by accident today, you can always drop us a review or a comment wherever you get your podcasts from. So you can also email us, because we still check that every once in a while, at digitalsectionpodcast@gmail.com. Share us your favorite zombie movies, or heck, any horror movies at this point you want to watch or you like watching. What's the horror movie you come back to every year, if not multiple? So give us those movies, any ideas you have for future shows. We would happily be able to discuss any of that with you. And until next time, keep on dissecting. And Mark just had a flashback. And now I remember why I don't use hamster style anymore.
Oh, I can still smell that newspaper.